5, 4, 3, 2, and we're live with Be Green with Amy.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Be Green with Amy. I'm Amy. After adopting a whole food plant-based lifestyle, my hubby Rick and I lost over 130 pounds. Now I coach others on their plant-based journey. Just Task Voice. Let's welcome our guest.
Dr. Peter Rogers is a Stanford and Harvard-educated MD who for over 30 years has helped people optimize performance for school, sports, and health. He is an imaging-guided surgeon and neuroradiologist who's written nutrition, medical, and study skill books. Please click like to help Be Green with Amy. Welcome, Dr. Peter Rogers.
Greetings and welcome back, Dr. Rogers.
Thanks. Hi.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you here. There's been a lot of people that have been already sending in questions for you. We always enjoy having you on the show because you always bring a refreshing viewpoint to a lot of different things and topics that we're trying to be interested in. Today, we're talking about a little bit different topic because most of the time we're talking about plant-based nutrition and things that go along with that. But you have written so many different books because you have so many different interests. And one of the topics that you like to talk about is learning strategies. And you were talking about how the kids are going back to school and it would be a great time to talk about that. And then we were also talking about how even my Green Warriors are looking at different, well, they're watching your presentations and they're watching other doctors and registered dietitians. And we're all just trying to absorb a fire hydrant of information just coming to us all at once. And it's so challenging sometimes to remember everything that we're learning. So you're going to give us strategies that the kids going back to school can use, but also that we can use when we're learning about nutrition, which is going to be so helpful. And I really appreciate that. Okay. So what we're going to do now is I wanted to ask the Green Warriors, tell me, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments so we can all see what a close-knit world we are and find out who else. I see that Kerry is on. Greetings, Kerry. She said, oh, my favorite. I think she's referring to Dr. Rogers. And greetings, Colleen. She says hello. And Roxy says hello. Greetings, Roxy. Roxy is tuning in from Dallas. Okay. So we're getting some, and then Colleen is coming in from Connecticut. All right, we're getting some coasts in the middle of the U.S. Let's see where anybody else is coming in from. All right, so Dr. Rogers is tooled up his presentation, and he's going to be talking all about this topic. If you have a question for Dr. Rogers, go ahead and type it in the chat now. I have the ability to save it so that when it's time to ask him the question, I can definitely pull it up. So are you ready, Dr. Rogers?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
All right. Well, I'm going to pull up your presentation and get ready, Green Warriors. Here we go.
Okay. I started out with this image here of Rodney Dangerfield's movie Back to School because it's August and kids are going back to high school and college now and grad school. So that movie was a lot of fun. He's one of the best comedians. Okay, we're going to eventually get to this checklist, but I got to give you some backstory first. You can also hit the button on your computer keyboard where it's called print screen. It's sort of above the insert key, and this will be like the best information you could ever get about how to become a good student. I'm going to tell you a little bit of backstory first, though, to put everything into context. I was like the best medical student in the whole United States when I was a medical student. So I'm very serious and intense about study skills. And because people often think, oh, somebody got 99th percentile on their SAT, isn't that great? Yeah, that's a great achievement. But what I'm trying to say is the average student at Stanford is like 99.5 or higher in a science class, or significantly above that. And if you think about an athlete, if you want to start on your high school team, you got to be 99th percentile, let's say in a reasonably big high school. To start in a junior college, maybe about 99.9 percentile. To start in a Division I team, 99.999 percentile, and then to be pro or whatever, national caliber, 99.999. Oh, the reason I go through all that is there's higher levels of intensity and competition. And if you study those things, you will be able to dramatically improve performance. People don't even realize what they could do. here is my parents. Here's my father. Here's my mother. And my father was from Ireland. My mother was from Puerto Rico. These priests are like the biggest priests in the world. I've never seen any priests this big. My parents are normal sized people. These priests are giants. My mother was the best person I ever met my whole life. My father was a very good man, and he was very good to me too. They both grew up in houses with dirt floors in them, though, so they were both really poor growing up. And the relevance of that was they knew nothing about America. So when I was in high school, I never even took an honors class, not one, yet alone I never even heard of an AP class. So I go to Stanford as a freshman in college, and all these other kids, had taken all these AP classes, were in prep schools. They were very well coached, many of them. So I was way behind. I'm just going to tell you a little bit of backstory. When I was in grade school, I think it's because I was smart, but they labeled me as hyperactive, and I was put into a solitary confinement pod classroom for 2 years, third and fourth grade. I had to sit by myself alone in a room. And like I said, I think it's because, it was easy for me. I would do the homework in 5 seconds, and then I'd want to joke around with my friends, throw a paper airplane or tell a joke, whatever. But I really did not like school. I hated school because the way they treated me. They put me in solitary confinement. I mean, it was awful. Nowadays, they would have labeled me hyperactive and drugged me with attention deficit medicines. And so here I joke. You see this picture here. The butler, concierge, he wants to report a drug sale. And so meanwhile, the person living in the big fancy building is the person pushing OxyContin or attention deficit meds for kids. It's against the law to sell amphetamines on a street corner, but doctors are allowed to prescribe them to kids. It's ridiculous. Don't ever let your kid take one of those medicines. Don't ever take a brain supplement. It's all BS. Don't ever do any of that stuff. All right. Okay. By the way, all psychiatric medicines cause the equivalent of a slow progressive lobotomy. I think psychiatry is the worst field in medicine. I think they totally exaggerate and are dishonest about the results with their drugs. Okay. It's insane. If somebody's sad about something, so they need a chemical lobotomy or maybe a surgical lobotomy nowadays, or an electrical lobotomy with electroshock. All that stuff is totally overrated. I'm just letting you know. Don't give them too much respect. They don't deserve it. Okay. And my father was a psychiatrist, and that was back in the day when they really didn't know better. And he did the best he could. But like most doctors, he was kind of conformist. He believed the journal articles. And it wasn't until later people started to realize the drugs are not so great. Back when the first drugs came out, there were the tricyclic antidepressants, and there were the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Everybody thought they were so great. My mother used to have some of his free samples, and she said, "Oh, my friend was sad, but I gave her, some free samples of like Prozac or something, and now she's doing so much better." And I'm like, "Ma, you're not allowed to do that." Okay. And nowadays, if you look at journal articles, you'll find Prozac has been recommended by some journal article authors to be used for chemotherapy. It has that many side effects. It's that potent and toxic of a drug. So anyways, I just show you, here's my father. Here is my Uncle Tommy, and here's my Uncle John. And Uncle John was kind of a jerk, okay? They would come over. He would read a book the day before on Saturday, come to our house on Sunday, and then he would start questioning us, interrogating us. So and a lot of times we were arguing about the Vietnam War and stuff like that, or Christianity. And he would insult my father, and he didn't insult me. He says, "You're as stupid as your father." And so I thought he was really obnoxious. I told my mother, "Why do you even invite him to our house?" Because everybody who ever came to our house was invited by my mother. She had all my father's friends' phone numbers. My father never once did he ever make a phone call in all of about 40 years when I lived at the same house as him, or 35 years. I was away for a while at school and stuff. But my mother made all the phone calls, all social events, and there were a lot of them. My mom called everyone. Well, anyways, the point was my mother's like, "Oh, he likes talking with his brother about books." So the reason I go through all this was my father was working most of the time, but when he would get some time off and I was around, he would take me to the bookstore, and he would buy like 10 books. I would buy like 5 books. And part of what was going on, I was psyched up for this guy coming over, this jerk, so I could have a bunch of books read and I could interrogate him. Well, what about this? What about this? And so, paradoxically, that was actually a very good education for me. I was very much in the habit at a young age of reading a book and arguing about the book. Not just some BS phony book report in front of the class, but seriously wanting to argue with him and put him in his place. Okay, the other brother was kind of brilliant guy. He was a physicist engineer, but he kept eating high-fat foods. He died of a myocardial infarction at 51 years of age. Okay, this is me when I was a sophomore in high school. I was a really strong guy. I was just physically strong. His father had been 9-time national champion of bicycle riding. I should have put a picture of him in here. And so I just had a lot of athletic ability. I really didn't have much coaching initially. Sophomore year of high school, I was like bench press 215 pounds. I remember as an 8th grader. I was just strong. Here's me wrestling. I was 39-1, took 3rd in the state in Illinois as a high school junior. I'm crying because I wanted to win. I should have won. I screwed up. I should have won. But I'm just letting you know, I had a lot of athletic ability. In the freestyle schoolboy state tournament right after that, I pinned my way through. And then I got injured, and that injury was a disaster in my life. So here I am with one of my brothers, and I'm just trying to show you the background I'm coming from. My brothers are really good looking. Here's my younger brother. Here's my older brother. If I liked a girl, I learned a lesson. As soon as a girl would see my brother, they go, "Oh my God, your brother is gorgeous," and they would fall in love with my brother. I could never keep a girlfriend from falling in love with my brothers. That would be impossible. So what I did was I would have to sleep with her first if I liked her, and that way she'd be committed to me because they were in love with my brother. He's a world champion athlete now. He actually had some problems in college because he had exercise-induced asthma. And then he figured out he became a vegetarian in his 40s, and then he went on to become a world champion athlete. So he had exercise-induced asthma, which I think was probably due to the excessive sodium in processed foods. And then his endurance came back to what it was before. And then here's the other guy. He was real tall, too. I ran on a cross-country team my senior year because I had injured my growth plate on my clavicle, the collarbone, in the spring of my junior year. And so I couldn't wrestle for a while, and I was trying to take time off from wrestling to get it to heal. I had a hard time getting it to heal because of a fracture, through the growth plate, like a Salter Harris type growth plate fracture, such that it would not heal. And that was very, 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 very frustrating for me. The reason I'm showing you a picture of a bunch of runners is that they're the smartest kids in the school. These guys had SAT scores in the 1400s. I think 99 percentile begins somewhere close to 1200 out of 16. All of these guys had extraordinary high schools. He had a math score like 750 or something. They were the smartest guys in the school by far. So it was kind of fun for me to be around them. I had never taken school very seriously. I kind of, I liked wrestling, spending time with my friends. I kind of in my mind's eye envisioned my futures. Someday I would go to University of Iowa. It was the best wrestling college in the United States at that time. I'd be a national champion, and then I'd become a wrestling coach. That was my goal in life when I was a young guy. I fell in love with this girl. I was totally in love with this girl. She was a musician. She's a fantastic musician. She was a world-class musician. And I was really happy. I was as happy as a young guy could be. Okay, I had a wonderful family. I had a lot of athletic potential, even though I got injured. My life was great. I'm telling you all this because it's about to go south real fast. So here's me when I was at Stanford, my Stanford wrestling uniform. And that's what I looked like when I was in college. I was a powerful guy. And like I said, too, it was real competitive academically. And so here's what sort of like happened to my life. I went from having a great life to having a terrible life. I go to Stanford, which is far, far, far away from me, impossible to ever go home. And I don't know anybody. I don't know a single person on campus except I know one guy, one of those cross-country runners actually went to Stanford. We weren't allowed to room together. They have a rule. You can't be in the same dorm as the kids from your high school, which I thought was a stupid rule. But basically, I kind of lost my whole life. I didn't know a single person. I had no friends. I separated from my girlfriend. My athletic ability, they gave me a scholarship, but the coach was pissed off at me because, I wasn't able to wrestle as well as I used to because of this injury, and it was taking me a long time to come back. So the coach is like telling people, I wasted a scholarship on Rogers. Maybe we can talk him into relinquishing his scholarship. And, so I was as lonely as you could be. I have this calendar on my wall counting every day when I could go home.
Oh, no.
And all these kids, are, from prep schools on the East Coast and all these, really advanced academic families. I never even took an honors class in high school. I'm afraid I'm going to flunk out. I called my mother on the phone and said, Mom, I hate this place. Can I please come home? And she's like, no, Peter, I want you to stay for 1 year. Just give it a try. And like I said, too, my girlfriend said, oh, would it be okay if she goes to homecoming with this other guy? She promises not to do anything with him. And I'm like, gosh, my whole life just sucks. Okay. It sucked in every way. And I was like mad at myself because I had come back a little early and wrestled in a competition. I wrestled in these other tournaments and I re-injured my clavicle. So I was behind where I should be in my athletic competition. And I was like mad at myself. I was so mad at myself. Why'd you come back, you stupid idiot? You could have been great. You screw it up. You ruined your career. You ruined your life. So I was like really mad at myself. Whenever I was by myself and no one was around, I would just start crying. Okay, and then, you know, my girlfriend and I, we drifted apart, which made me very, very sad. And there was like no girls at Stanford. Girls at Stanford were so ugly, it's unbelievable. 9 out of 10 California girls are pretty, and the 10th one goes to Stanford. In 4 years at Stanford, I never once had a girlfriend there. Never once. Plus, lots of the guys are these good-looking, athletic guys. So in terms of looks and like on the social dating scale, the men are like a bunch of 8, 9s, and 10s. The women are a bunch of, you know, 2, 3s, and 4s in comparison, in terms of a sexual attractiveness, etc. Well, anyways, there was nothing else to do, so I got a lot of time to study. And I didn't do so well in my first set of grades. I got like B minuses. And like my social status from being a high school star athlete up here went down to like being a wrestler at Stanford. They didn't like wrestlers at Stanford too. They kind of had this attitude, wrestlers and football players are a bunch of thugs. In my high school, you know, I'd win a tournament, my picture would be on the front page. I was like a hero of the school for a couple of days, okay? Versus at Stanford, they're like, wrestlers and football players are a bunch of thugs. We shouldn't allow them to get athletic scholarships. Stanford should get rid of their wrestling team and their football team. That was the attitude over there. So it was weird, but it was very low status. Plus, it was California, a warm state. So they really had, it was like no social status at all to be a varsity athlete. When I went to med school, too, I went to med school in a really kind of like lousy neighborhood. A lot of university hospitals are in bad neighborhoods. So there was zero social events either. So I was pretty social isolated for a long time, which is good for studying, but it's not much of a fun life. Okay. And so I said, I almost thought, you know, my social status would come back. It really hasn't too much. You know, I'm a workaholic old man. I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't understand what was happening to me socially, psychologically at the time. But in retrospect, I can kind of look at it, both the things I did wrong and the things I did right. All this is going to relate to how I became such a great student, how other people could dramatically improve their academic ability. One of the things is Arthur Schopenhauer, the great German philosopher. He said a man should forget about trying to have a happy life. He says a man should try to have a heroic life. If you know what you think you should be doing and you commit yourself to doing it, what ends up happening is you like yourself, and then you're happy because you like yourself. And I think he's actually correct on that. And James Watson, you know, the guy who co-discovered the DNA double helix structure with Crick, he said an animal is happy when it does what it's meant to do. A horse is happy when it runs. And I think there's some truth in that, because after that conversation with my mother on the phone, I said, okay, Mom, I'll stick it out here for 1 year. I'll do the best I can, but then I'm coming home. And what I vowed to myself was, I am going to become a learning machine. I will study until I fall out of my desk and drop from exhaustion. I knew I could push myself. I pushed myself really intensely, good mental toughness from wrestling. So I said, I will do every last ounce of strength and energy in my body I will put towards becoming a good student, because I was kind of humiliated. You know, guys who looked up to me in high school, now I'm, you know, wimpy. I'm not as strong as I used to be. My athletic career looks like it's over. And now I'm afraid I'm going to flunk out. And I'm like, I screwed up my athletic career. I'm not going to screw up my academic career. God's given me another chance. I'm going to try to make this work. And I kind of like looked out the balcony down at the sidewalk. I was on the second floor. And a lot of kids there had, you know, maybe come from sheltered backgrounds. They're out drinking. They're vomiting all over the sidewalk. And I remember thinking in my mind, good, go ahead, go to your parties, go home to your families on the weekend, get drunk. While you guys are goofing off, I'm going to catch you. And I prayed to God. I said, God, please give me the strength and the ability to make this. I want to have a good career in academics. I'm going to be a great scientist or a great doctor. So I was super motivated, off the charts motivated. And also I had this feeling that if I could work really hard and someday become a great doctor or scientist, that then I would forgive myself. Because I didn't forgive myself. I was mad at myself for ruining my athletic career, for coming back too soon on my injuries and getting re-injured. Okay, I was mad at my father because he told me I had to go to college only 4 years. I really should have redshirted. That means taking an extra year to recover from my injury and competed, because I ended up being well, I'll tell you what happened later, but I was pissed off at my father later on because of that as well. So anyways, though, I had to work hard so that I could forgive myself. And that's actually a big deal. This was one of my coaches, Dave Schultz, world and Olympic champion. His brother, Mark Schultz, world and Olympic champion. This is one of the co-wrestlers, Dave Lee. This is, one of the wrestlers' bedrooms here. We have all the posters. Here's the posters of the world and Olympic champions, All-Americans, and the other good wrestlers on our team. And it was a very strict meritocracy. And I had to wrestle every day in the practice room with world and Olympic champions, national champions, and All-Americans. So I went from being a very dominant athlete in high school to being low man on the totem pole. Okay. And getting my butt kicked every day was a big motivator. Like, I screwed up my athletic career. I don't want to screw up my academic career. So that's why I always had lots of energy for that reason. Here's Alfred Adler. He's a psychiatrist, physician who came up with the idea. He was previously a protege of Freud. Him and Jung were the two main proteges of Freud, and they sort of broke away from Freud for different reasons. But Adler has a great concept called the inferiority principle. And the idea of it is that a man feels inferior for some reason, and it bothers him. And because it bothers him, he tries to overcompensate in some way. And that would be an exact description of how I felt. I felt inferior to all my friends. I could kick the crap out of them in high school, and now they're All-Americans, national champions. And I ended up being pretty good, but I was nothing like what I used to be. So it pissed me off so much. So I sort of I screwed up my athletic career. I'm not going to screw up my academic career. And then the other guy who I like is Kazimir Dobronsky. And he came up with the theory of personality, disintegration, and reintegration. And so the idea is that a person has a disappointment, a setback, a failure, and they're very sad and upset about it. But instead of getting angry and resentful, what they do is they transfer their energy into some other activity and use that to motivate them, to energize them. And that's exactly what I did. So the theory of personality disintegration and then positive reintegration. So it's actually very good. And I think I actually have something that's characteristic of gifted people. It's called overexcitability. It was important to me. This was my life, and I wanted it to be good. Okay, I'm going to also show you something here. Here's a Yerkes-Dodson curve of stress and performance. So basically, you need some stress. Otherwise, you're bored, asleep, lazy, unmotivated. So you want enough stress to energize you. That's called being in the peak performance zone or in the zone. Okay, you don't want too much stress to make you anxious or distracted, overdoing it. By the way, if you want to maximize performance, this is a great book, one of the best ever written on the psychology of performance, called Maximum Achievement by Brian Tracy. I highly recommend Brian Tracy. He tells you how to get into the right thought of mind for top-level performance. Maximum Achievement is his best book. You can watch all this stuff on the internet for free, but he's really good. Okay, and then some of the things that come up is you have to learn how to be an outsider. And, I liked high school where I was sort of in the middle of it. Okay. I was popular. I had really nice friends. And a lot of my life, probably, most of my life since then, without even wanting it to happen, I just kind of became an outsider most of my life. And just like the Bard here, he's sort of not in the middle of the party. And you have to learn how to deal with that. And as strange as it sounds, most of the best achievements come from these guys. They don't come from these guys. Whoever is usually in the center of the action and immediately accepted by the group, they tend to be narrow-minded and are not able to think objectively or in a wider way. So what I mean by that is, for example, look at these great authors. If you look at many of the greatest authors of all time, take a look at Thucydides. He was the Athenian admiral who was, charged with having failed and causing the Athenians to lose a battle. So he was fired from his job. And he came back and he wrote the Peloponnesian War, the greatest historical novel of ancient times. And then there's another story very much like him, which would be Lew Wallace. He was a Civil War general for the United States, the Union Army. And there was a miscommunication between Lew Wallace and Ulysses S. Grant at the Battle of Shiloh. And the Union lost a lot of soldiers, 13,000 casualties, which is an extraordinarily high number for that time, back around 1862, such that he was sort of shamed and disgraced, Lew Wallace, after that. And it really pissed him off, and he felt it was unfair that they had miscommunicated the orders to him. And he went back, and it motivated him so much to do all this reading and studying. He wrote the book Ben-Hur. So Ben-Hur was the most popular book in the entire United States of the entire 1800s, all the way up until 1936 when Gone with the Wind was written, also about the Civil War. But I just tell you that because that's a perfect example of a Dobronsky personality, disintegration, reintegration, and Alfred Adler inferiority complex compensation situation. So everybody has setbacks and sadness and disappointments and failures, and you want to be able to bounce back because you're going to have some setbacks. Okay, and that's why a person who has a sense of destiny or religion, those things help you to bounce back from the inevitable disappointments. Okay, and then these are all just a bunch of other famous authors and scholars. Plato was a failed playwright. He wanted to be a politician. He was imprisoned by the king of the area where he went to help. Cicero also was exiled. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore, but I'm just telling you, this is a fact all through history. Many of the absolutely best books and best intellectual achievements come from people who were exiled or outside the mainstream. Look at Newton and his Anno Mirabilis in 1665, where he invented calculus, figured out optics, and figured out the basics of gravity, as well as some of the laws of physics, of motion, thermodynamics. Okay, I liked Beethoven. Beethoven was a little bit of a frustrated, crazy, intense guy, and one of the things he says, the key to being an artist is to learn to trust yourself. Now, don't get me wrong, you have to do a lot of training and development before you can trust yourself to get to that point. But at the same time, too, the driving force has to come from inside you. It's nice to have the encouragement of parents and other people, but in the end, it has to come from inside if you really want to be great. And there's an anonymous quote, if it is to be, it is up to me. And I used to say that to myself, too. And also, one way to lower your stress is to, give it to God. Say, hey, God, just let me do the best I can. I'll do the best I can. And just to it's a way to let the stress off. I'll just share with you a quick story. When I was a sophomore at Stanford, a friend of mine, we went bird watching, and he had a friend who was a naturalist, because my friend wanted to be a wildlife biologist. And I'd never even taken biology class before. So I'm hanging out with these guys, and, they're identifying all the birds, talking about the ecology of the area. And so I went back to the Palo Alto Baylands by myself. I rode my bicycle out there by myself, and it was a long bike ride. It was over an hour bike ride. And I go up to the visitor station, there's a building in the back. And I said, can I please have your field guide? And the lady goes, we don't have a field guide. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have a field guide? To me, that was like, are you insane? You don't have a field guide? So here I was wrestling on the varsity wrestling team, and I was taking a really difficult course load in school. But in my free time, I went and mapped out all the birds, and I wrote my own field guide, and I gave it to them, a free field guide, because in my mind's eye, I was thinking I might become a biologist. I have to learn how to do this. I have to learn how to map out the populations and be able to make my own field guide, because we would always use the Roger Torrey Peterson field guides. And bird watching is one of the best ways you could ever get started in biology. But so the same thing that gets me teased and gets my family to say I'm crazy because I'm so intense about trying to achieve things when I'm interested in them, that's also the reason why I'm able to do stuff, because I take it seriously and I want to do it. And I think that's a good thing. So people have to get excited. They have to get intense. You don't achieve things by sitting around watching TV. You achieve them by saying, I'm going to do this, and then making that your number one intense focus for a while. I love Maxwell Maltz. A lot of the best athletes in the United States at my time when I was in college were reading Maxwell Maltz. He was a plastic surgeon, and he noticed that some patients would have great outcomes, some lousy outcomes, and there was nothing different about the people except their personal goals. And so he called it a person's self-image. Like if you get a lady who has to go for some type of surgery and she wants to get home to her kids, he said, she will get better and she will go home to her kids and she will do well. On the other hand, if you have another lady, he was a plastic surgeon, and he says, she's not really sure what she wants. She's not that motivated. She's kind of unclear on her goals. He says often those patients will have lousy outcomes and they'll sit around in the hospital getting complications, infections, and having a real prolonged post-operative course. And he talks a lot about the self-image. And I really like this old story. It's a children's story, but it's relevant. I think I can. I think I can. I know I can. From the little engine that could. And I would talk to myself. I would say, I know I could do it. I know I can do it. Why not me? Why is my friend from high school, first in his class getting A pluses and me getting B minuses? Why am I screwing up? What am I doing wrong? He's fine. Maybe he's smarter than me, but he's not that much smarter than me. Why can't I do better? So then I started to study skills. I found a guy who was getting A pluses at Stanford in the most difficult classes. And I hung around and I said, teach me. What can I do? What can I do? How can I get good at school? And I just copied him. This is Maxwell Maltz's book. It's called Psycho-Cybernetics. And the gist of this, cybernetics means like to drive your own boat. So this is to drive your own boat with your mind. And the gist of it is making yourself stronger, making yourself more resilient, energizing yourself to achieve things. And I found it very helpful. He's got some videos on the internet. You just type in Maxwell Maltz. He's a real smart plastic surgeon guy. This guy, Matt Furry, was like a national champion wrestler at University of Iowa. Okay, Carol Dweck. Now, she came up with a good concept. And I just had this already, but I didn't know the concept. And she calls it the growth mindset. The idea that you say to yourself, I can get better. I can improve if I just put the effort in. And this is relevant to a lot of kids, because a lot of kids, they say, well, either you're smart or you're not. They have a couple setbacks in school, and then they just go, well, I guess I'm not that smart. And they kind of give up on themselves academically. Versus what Carol Dweck would say is, the growth mindset is the idea. Well, let's say calculus was too difficult for me last year. Well, I'm going to get ready for it this year. I'm going to review all my algebra, all my trigonometry, everything. So then once I step into that calculus room, I'll be ready for the class. Okay. So that's actually very useful and children should be encouraged. And she would even say, like, don't tell the kid they're smart, just tell them good effort, things like that. The gist of it is just to realize you can improve. That's an important point. And kind of in my mind's eye, I had this vision. If only I can work hard enough and long enough, find good teachers and stuff, I could someday become a great doctor or scientist. And I had this feeling that my life wouldn't suck anymore, because my life sucked. First of all, I was mad at myself. I had to forgive myself eventually. And secondly, I was as lonely as it could get. There were no parties. Okay, in high school, there's a party every weekend. There's all these nice girls. You know them, they know you. And sooner or later, you pick each other. You like her, she likes you. And his life is easy. Your parents are paying the bills, putting a roof over your head, feeding you. There's nothing to do but why not fall in love? Okay, and all of a sudden, I'm at college. There are no parties. Month after month, there were no parties. And there was never going to be any parties. It was always going to suck socially. It was terrible. And the same thing in medical school. There were zero social events. None. Okay, and lots of people were locals. They had friends. So I didn't know anybody. I'm sitting in a classroom with 333 students, and I barely know any of them. Some stupid class we went to, dissection with a cadaver. I refused to go. I said, this is bullshit. I'm not going to sit here and inhale formaldehyde. Screw this. I just went to the class practical the night before where the professor had everything marked out. But the point I'm making is I never spoke to any of those students. We were just, numbers in a machine. Okay, we didn't have any social interaction. So it was very unsocial. But in my mind's eye, I had this idea, kind of like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the choral symphony, the fourth movement, the Ode to Joy part, that if I just kept working, that someday it would be like that joyous moment. Things would get good. So that's why I persevered. And another metaphor I would give, the idea like, you're like this, I told you about the little engine that could, the train huffing and puffing along, cranking, working every day, with the idea that someday I would join up with the other part of the Transcontinental Railroad and everything would be great and spectacular and wonderful. I couldn't do much on my own, but I was going to get to the point where I could synergize with other people and things would someday be great. So I had to believe, in the light at the end of the tunnel in order to keep pushing myself so much, because it was difficult. And some other things that helped were my wrestling coaches were great to me. This is Mark Schultz. He was 3-time NCAA champion, world and Olympic champion. There's his brother, Dave Schultz, also NCAA champ and world champ. And I learned from him the psychology of being mentally tough. He was really good for me in that sense. And I learned a few other things from him too. From Dave, I learned when we first started out in practice, he was fat, he was weak in the weight room, and he was slow when we ran sprints. I'm like, how does a guy who's fat, weak, and slow become national champion, world champion? Okay. And then I was about ready to quit the team after my sophomore year because I had some other injuries. I was favoring my shoulder and my collarbone fracture. And so he's like, and I was about to quit the team. He goes, Rogers, you don't quit. You got potential. He said, you hang around with me, you join the athlete fraternity, you're going to be fine. Just do what I say. And he would tell me all these stories about, competing in the world tournaments, the national tournaments, what it's like to fight against the Russians, all this stuff. Okay. And it got me really inspired because, he would tell me about Gene Mills going up against the Russians, the Russian world champ, and, Shagayev, and he kicked the crap out of Shagayev. So I was really inspired. And so just so you know, I went from being ready to quit because I was so frustrated with all my problems to I came back the next year. I set the all-time school record for victories in a season with 39 wins. I was captain of the team. Here's Dave Schultz, his brother, world and Olympic champion too. What I learned from him especially was the idea of incrementalism. And by the way, I learned more from these guys by far than any of my professors at Stanford. And it's kind of an approach to any problem. So what I learned from him is, look, he's got a little bit of pudge on him. Normally, world and Olympic class wrestlers, they don't look like this. They're a lot more muscular. So what I learned from him is when he was a kid, he would ride his bicycle in 8th grade to practice at the 8th grade team, to practice at the high school team, Pali High. He grew up in Palo Alto, right by Stanford, and then ride his bike over to Stanford and practice with the college team. When he was younger, he was fat and he was dyslexic, and the other kids would make fun of him. Hey, you fat, stupid retard, and call him names. His nickname was Pudge. So anyways, he was so determined to become a great wrestler that he went to 3 practices a day as of 8th grade. He became the best wrestler ever in the history of the United States. He was like Bruce Lee when he was in high school. For a high school wrestler, he pinned Chuck Yagla, the 2-time NCAA defending national champion, when he was in high school, caught him in a throw and pinned him. So anyways, what I did was basically apply his approach to school. I'm like, how can I get good at school? So I started to read all the study skills books. I started to read all the memorization technique books. And what he basically did was, you can only get about 10% stronger than other guys by lifting weights, for example. You can get about 10% better conditioned than most guys. if you really push yourself for endurance. But you can be 100 times better than other people at technique. So he emphasized technique. If you ask a regular college coach, how do you finish a single leg? He'll get it from the feet, let's say. He'll say, oh, well, you can do a dump, you can run the pipe, or you can treetop it, okay? He would give him like 25 ways to finish that single leg from the feet. So he just knew more technique than everybody else, which enabled him almost to read his opponent's mind. So I tried to become like him for school. And I also took the psychology of Mark Schultz. Mark Schultz was so intense. He was like, your opponent, he's trying to beat you up and embarrass you in front of all your friends and family. Screw him. He's your worst enemy in the world. And I won't even go into all the other things he said, but it was so intense that it would get me very energized. Okay, here just so you can see it, I'm telling you the truth. This is gostanford.com. You can look me up. Peter Rogers, 39 victories, 1985 to 86. Okay, that was the most ever. There's been some guys since that. They added more competition to their schedule, and there's other guys who won more matches than me. But up until that time, I had won the most victories ever of a Stanford wrestler. Okay, now I'm going to show you the memory champion here, because one of the things that's important for school is to realize what is it? And school is basically a memorization contest. Most academics at the grade school, high school, and college level, and even most grad school academics, is basically just memorization. So what this guy is doing here is he has ear protectors. Lots of them have ear protectors, ear protectors, ear protectors, ear protectors, to avoid being distracted. You can't turn your ears off. So you wear these ear protectors and you're not distracted by sound. So you get more bandwidth. All your brain power is focused on the task. In this case, memorizing a deck of cards. He's also put a piece of paper on the side. Some people even wear these like pinhole goggles. And the reason for that is he doesn't want to have any visual distractions. Just focus on what he's doing. So these are some of the things, but I studied all the memory contest champions too. So what you want to do is be good at memorizing stuff. I ended up doing fantastic in school. I'm going to show you in a little bit the checklist and stuff, but I'm just showing. Here's a picture of me when I was in medical school. I graduated first in my class, 333 students. I was like best student in the United States. I don't know if I was the best. I was either the best or equal to the best in biochemistry, for example, the most difficult subject. The dean wrote the foreword for this book, Medical Students Guide to Top Board Scores, published with Little Brown. So I got really, really, really good at school. Okay. Actually, the first semester in college, I got like only 10th percentile in the class, and I was totally pissed off because I went to University of Illinois. I was like, God darn it. I go, I have given up so much. My life sucks so bad. I should always be first in the class. So for me to be 10th percentile was like a terrible insult. I felt like somebody mugged me in the alley and beating me up. And then I was sitting with in the cafeteria, and I heard some kids sitting next to me about a week or two after the midterms came back. And they're like, well, my senior year in college, like Champaign-Urbana, I took anatomy, histology. So they took all the classes before. I was like, how could these kids compete with me? How could that happen? And it was because they had all the classes before. I was over at Stanford, counting the number of mitochondria in a bug's ass while they were taking all the classes that they were going to take next year for med school. So they had an advantage on me. And once I realized that, I would just study more. Okay, here's some big tricks now for making somebody good at school. I'm starting to get into the real meat, but I'm letting you know where I come from because I think the psychological component is equally important to all these study skills tricks. Making yourself powerful psychologically dramatically improves performance. I have this book here. I don't know if you can see me. Can you see me on a screen? Can you maybe screenshot to me? I can show you my book here. Can you see it when I hold this book up?
Yeah, now I'll put you in solo mode so we can see.
Okay. Here's my book for my residency. I did a surgical internship, then I did a diagnostic radiology residency. I was doing a lot of imaging guided surgery as part of the residency, but I use this book so much. It's all dog-eared. I had to tape it back together. I would just put all my extra notes inside of it. Nobody really took the internet seriously back in those days because it was kind of slow. But all the information was in an outline format text. I would then add information to the back of the book. I would cross-reference it with the journals, with the other textbooks. So, only the top like 20% of the class could get into diagnostic radiology at that time. For our boards, a 4.5-hour test, I was done like an hour and 10 minutes with a perfect score. So I'm showing you, this is the secret. All of my notes were condensed, meaning they were all in one location. So I could always find everything very quickly. And whatever it is that I learned, I would put it into this book. So all of the information was in one spot. That made it very easy to review a topic and to look everything up. I would always have a flashcard. I would have some type of flashcard every day. I would keep it in my pocket. And whatever happened during the day, I would write it down. When we had our first meeting, we had a bunch of senior residents that were all AOAs. And AOA is somebody who graduated in the top 10% of their medical school class. And they would come talk to the first year residents and say, okay, Now listen up. Here's what you got to do. You read this book for the brain. You read this book for the spine. You read this book for the neck. You read this book for the chest. You read this book for the abdomen. You read this book for musculoskeletal. And they go, if you just do this, you're going to pass board. Read these books cover to cover. And I sat there saying, oh, BS. I'm not going to do that. And why would I do that? Why was I so confident? The reason is I know that the brain is programmed to remember whatever it thinks is useful and interesting. So when you are sitting there working, taking care of patients, you're going to remember everything that happens because you have an emotional connection to it. And so when you go to conference and somebody's giving a lecture, that also is a little bit energizing. You're going to remember that next best. Okay, but sitting there reading a book cover to cover is going to put you to sleep because stuff starts all sounding the same. So I would always take my note card as soon as I got home. I would throw it into a box, stuff to be looked at, and then I would try to get to it as soon as I could and start studying it. And whenever I learned something new, I would put it into this book. So I basically call this a memory management system. All of my information was in this book, okay? And therefore, I could always find it. I always knew where it was. I could retrieve the information very quickly. And this is a form of condensed notes. So this is an outline format with an index in the back. So this is what I would call outline format condensed notes, okay? And then later on, after I did a neuroradiology fellowship for my boards in neuroradiology, I would take all of the information and you might want to mag up to me now on this one. I put tabs on the side of the book and I would tape pictures because this book on itself is not that great of a book, but I would tape all these pictures into it. So again, everything you could think of related to the brain, the neck, and the spine and neurophysiology, I had it all in the same spot. Then I put my notes on there. I'd index it. I cross-reference the index in the back of the book. So I call this illustrated condensed notes. These are very powerful study skills. In the back of another book, I would keep mnemonics. I wrote hundreds of mnemonics. I had like 600 of them to like memorize things, through word association. These are all basic study skills. I'll show you some even more, and there's an even more powerful study skill I'll get to in just a moment. Okay, well, here's my mnemonics. So I wrote hundreds of them. I had like 600 mnemonics for my residency boards. This was the inside of the book. I would sometimes use Post-its to add additional information in that way because you can lift up the Post-it if I got information underneath it. This was my illustrated condensed notes, picture condensed notes. And you can see my notes are written in there. I taped these pictures into it. So I had everything in one spot. And I was told, it's unofficial because we didn't get a number grade, but I was also told that I had gotten a perfect score on at least one section. They didn't tell me for the other sections, but for the one they did, the guy started talking. He goes, "Where are you from? How did you study for this test? Your performance was extraordinary." I wrote this book here, straight A at Stanford and on to Harvard. I just show you, this is my bathroom. I call it the magic bathroom. I had read Mozart, and Mozart said, he used to write letters when he's on the toilet, okay? And he said, I think it only fitting to write while shitting. And I thought, you know what? That's pretty clever. Why don't I read while I'm on the loo? Okay, so I had this little portable table. You can slide it over with your foot, and I'd always have a book on there. And then for number ones, I had seen the Monty Python scene where they said, every sperm is sacred. And I thought, you know what? Every void is sacred. Why don't I always read at least one page every time I void? Because if you count the number of times you go into the bathroom, I think you'd be amazed how often you go into the bathroom without even realizing it, to rinse your hands off or whatever. And I also have an audio CD player right next to the bathroom on a table right next to the bathroom room. It's too wet in the bathroom to be in the bathroom itself. And I would play audiobooks, for example, when I used to floss my teeth. This was when I was taking my neuroradiology boards at this house, my old house, and I would tape the pictures of all the neuroradiology stuff in there. And I would look at the picture, then I would turn my head away, and could I describe every single thing on that picture? And so the things that were more complex and that I had to know backwards and forwards, I would tape them up on the wall. This is a book I wrote. I made a teenager version. This book's a little bit too advanced for some high school students and some college students, but anybody could read this, high school or college student. This is more like for really serious people, and there's a little bit of stuff in nutrition they're not ready for. But this one is a real fast, concise book. These are my parents. This is my mother. That's my father. Okay, here's my other house where I have my own new version of the Magic Bathroom. This is the book Foxcatcher by Mark Schultz. He's the wrestling coach that kind of saved my career there back when I was in college. Foxcatcher. And that was made into the movie. You guys have probably heard of Foxcatcher, the movie about the wrestlers, the brothers, Mark and Dave Schultz. There's other documentaries. The book's much better than the movie was. I would often have a textbook on top of the table. So for number twos, I'll usually read a textbook. Number ones, I'm reading a paperback. But in this way, I always read at least one book every week just in the bathroom. Whenever I'm in a car, I always listen to a book. I don't waste time, because if you listen to music, I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes if you only have a 5-minute ride, yeah, you might as well listen to a song. But if you have a decent commute, more than half an hour, then you should always listen to some type of audiobook or podcast. Why not learn something? Because it adds up. If you're working 5 days a week, driving 10 hours a week in a car, that's, the average audiobook's about 10 hours long. You complete a book. So I always read typically about one book every week in the bathroom and one book every week in the car from audiobooks. When I'm eating dinner, I very often will listen to an audiobook, or I will watch internet videos, and I get the equivalent of having read another book. So every week, without having to do anything, I automatically read about 3 books. And the reason I mention that is because most people never read another book again after high school. What happens is they're psychologically traumatized by their freshman year, where they have to read like the 3 worst books you could ever give to a first-year student. Kill a Mockingbird, which is an insult. Everybody hates that book. Then they have to read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, his worst book. Then they have to read Julius Caesar. And a freshman in high school, I don't care who they are, is not ready to read Shakespeare and Julius Caesar. So what comes to them, or they have to read Huckleberry Finn too. And that book stinks. Everybody tries to say, oh, it's such a great book. No, it stinks. I hate that book. So anyways, Mark Twain, I thought, was a jerk. He's not as nice as people think he is. You start studying Mark Twain, read his biography. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is they deliberately choose those books to make the kids hate reading. So most kids will never, ever read another book again the rest of their life, other than maybe something they're forced to for college. But it's so easy to read if you just have these habits: a magic bathroom, and listen to a book in the car, and then read something while you're eating dinner. Okay, if there's people at the dinner table you can talk to, fine, great. But most people in the modern world, they eat alone. All right, so anyways, that is the magic bathroom. Here's just another picture of the magic bathroom. And I would put people on my wall that inspired me. For example, this was Caldwell Esselstyn. That was inspiring, when his book came out, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Rodney Dangerfield, one of my favorite comedians. And so other things, Les Miserables, Victor Hugo, okay, some of the famous Greek playwrights, they inspired me. So whatever it was, I put it on there because it would motivate me. I'm trying to get my energy up to do something, whatever it might be. Maybe write a book, maybe take my boards, maybe whatever it is. Those types of things would energize me, because the world kind of pushes you down. And so you need to have ways to build yourself back up. And being around people who inspire you, even if it's just a picture of them on your wall, that helps. Every little bit helps. Okay, and this is just showing one more picture of how I had a little portable table on top of another thing here, so I could write or make a note. So like if I heard something interesting about my audiobook, I would write it on here. And I kind of got in the habit of studying languages. That's a long story, but I like doing that. But anyways, I would put the verb conjugations on the wall or something like that when I was going through that phase. These are flashcards, and this is in the bathroom on the other wall. And these are like little shoe boxes or whatever, delivery boxes, Amazon boxes, whatever you want to call them. So I'd throw all the flashcards in the first box, and then I'd look at it. If it was easy, I would immediately advance it to the next box. And then if it's easy again, to the next box, then the completion box. These are called Leitner boxes. It's spelled here it is, Leitner boxes. And the idea of it is that if the material is difficult, it stays in the first box. And this system gets you to go very quickly through the easy stuff. But the stuff that's difficult, it keeps on being slow to advance from box to box. And the relevance is that you therefore spend a lot more time on the difficult stuff. So Leitner boxes, they force you to spend more time with the challenging material, which is good, because a lot of students, all they do is highlight a book and then look at their highlighted book. Now, flashcards work well for things that are binary, like vocabulary in a foreign language. They're not as good for conceptual stuff, like when you have to memorize all the steps in a biochemical cycle, like glycolysis or something. But flashcards, they do have their place, and you want to keep them simple. All right. A lot of school is what I would call kind of binary, and even sometimes it's stupid. But as long as you understand what the game is, it's a memorization contest most of the time, then you can just play it. And that's why when you're good in school, you're good at everything. I would say, look, I don't even care what the class is. I don't even care what the topic is. I'm going to crush it. And that's just because I know I had great study skills and great memorization techniques. Because sometimes school is stupid, especially like grade school and high school. Ask yourself, how much do you remember from high school? Most people will tell you about the only thing they remember is how to type, and maybe a little bit more than that, a teacher that was nice to them. Like I had a teacher in literature who was nice to me. And I remember, memorizing Annabel Lee, for example, the poem and some other poems. And I liked that. It was many, many a year ago in A Kingdom by the Sea that a maiden there lived whom you may know, whose name was Annabel Lee. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. So I like that. I actually think students should do more of that sort of thing. So what I'm saying here is like in the movie Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman, the warden tells him, okay, now dig this hole. So he digs a hole. And then as soon as he's done digging the hole, he says, now you got your dirt on my grass. Get that dirt off my grass. So he puts it back in the hole. Then the other warden comes out and says, hey, you got dirt in my hole. Put it on the grass. So they're just wasting his time. And that's like the idea of like memorize a list of vocabulary words disconnected to anything. And then, you and the teacher know you're going to forget them after study. So sometimes you're going to have to do stuff like that. But just being good at memorization techniques, it's so easy anyways. You just do it. Okay, here's a book I would recommend to people trying to improve their academic skills. Super Memory, Super Student. This guy, Harry Lorraine, was a world-class memory expert, and he described some of his systems for memorizing things. Things like it's good to know the letter, number, alphabet, and just once you get in the habit of how you make word associations, the more dramatic, the better. The more movement, the better. The more silly, the better. The funnier, the better. The more unusual, the better. Throw something in there, dirty or whatever, and you'll remember it better. Whatever makes it more memorable is good for memorizing stuff. So anyways, it's good to read that book. And people who are, getting C's and D's in school will read this book and they'll go, well, gee, I can memorize the names of, 50 things in a row. And it gives them more confidence in themselves. So it helps people to restore their confidence to read a book like that. And I like some of the things about Beethoven. He's not the only one. There's been a bunch of famous scholars and geniuses who got a lot of their best ideas while walking, like Nietzsche and Ralph Waldo Emerson and a whole bunch of other ones. Aristotle's school used to be called the Peripatetics. He'd walk around teaching the students. So anyways, exercising makes you smarter. And I've had friends that are professors. They'll tell me the students who exercise a lot, they're much better students. And I think that also helped me to become a very good student at Stanford. I had nothing to do except exercise and study. And I know too now that I'll often, if I'm reading a book and I start spacing out and not remembering what was at the paragraph when I get to the end of it, I just get up and walk and I can remember better. Sometimes I'll come home from work and I'll walk around in circles in my house and I'll just to get a little exercise and to read, and that works well. Sometimes what I'll do too when I'm eating, this is back in my old house, it was easier to do that. If no one else was home, I will listen to an audiobook and I'll walk around in circles while I eat, because there are three different things. Listening to an audiobook is an intellectual thing. You're using your brain and your ears. Eating is a visceral thing. You're using your viscera of your body, your mouth, your stomach, and all that. And that's a different bodily system. And walking is your musculoskeletal system. So you can use those three systems independently. You can't multitask with two things at once. You can't read a book and listen to another book at the same time. That won't work. But you can use the three different systems simultaneously. And that's actually a good way to do stuff. Okay, so now here is the checklist. And you're probably going to want to hit the print screen button on this. If you got a kid going back to school, or if you want to just, increase your study, memory, academic ability, this is sort of the big thing. This is the best list in the whole world you'll ever see. All right, so choosing classes. If you want to get a good grade in a class, you have to have a strategy. Whenever I walk into a classroom, I want to be the best student in the whole room. So you have to figure out what's it going to take for me to be the best student in the room. Like if you're going to take a calculus class, well, then you better review all your algebra, trigonometry, and other related mathematics stuff before you walk into that classroom. Okay. Sometimes if you're in for a difficult challenge, like you feel like the other kids have an advantage on you, take a lighter load that semester so you'll have more time to study for the difficult test. You can take that same class in summer school at a junior college where it'll be easier for you. You can take it off track, like if you're a pre-med, take it off track when the red hot pre-meds are taking everything, and the class will be less competitive. You can wait and take it next year, let one of your friends take it first, and then they can advise you on how to approach the class. What I would do is if I really felt the class was going to be difficult, I would just study as much as I could in advance. See if you can get the textbook in advance or the syllabus in advance. In some classes, they would even have the old tests in the library. If they got the old test in the library, that's going to be the highest yield thing. You definitely want to go grab that. It's good to have older students who can give you advice. I had an older friend who had graduated first in his class. I'd heard about him at my med school. So I went and I tracked him down. I said, oh, can you please tell me what will help me in school? And he gave me really good advice. Preparing for class. Okay, you want to pre-read in the summer of your Christmas vacation, master the prerequisites. So let's say in the summer before your first semester, or on Christmas vacation before your winter semester, study a lot on the class. Study before you walk in the room. You want to try to be the best person in the class. The reason is if you're always trying to be the best in the class, you're probably going to get an A. You might not get an A+, but you'll get an A. And it's important to realize that lots of academics, it's not your baseline genetic ability as much as it is your personality. My senior year of high school, I was pissed off at one of the wrestling coaches because I felt that he had sort of pressured me to go back into competition before I was ready, and I had re-injured my shoulder. So I was mad at him. And he was teaching the statistics class. And I had to take his class. It was a requirement for graduation. I didn't like his stupid class, and I didn't really pay much attention. And basically a note was sent home to my parents at Christmas holidays, my senior year of high school, that I was flunking the class. I was allowed the option to convert it into pass or fail, and I had to study all Christmas break long of that stupid class, and I barely got a pass. I tell you that because I later realized, as my shoulder problem, collarbone fracture, wasn't healing well, that my wrestling career might be over, and my dream of being an Iowa national champion and a wrestling coach might be gone forever. So I'm like, I'm going to have to get serious about school. So I retook the SAT test 3 times, and my score went up a lot. It went up over more than 250 points, about 270 points. I also then figured I'm going to have to take calculus if I'm going to maybe be a scientist, a biologist, or a doctor or something, or a veterinarian or whatever. I got to take calculus. So I figured I'll take it in summer school because it'd be too difficult to take it at Stanford. So I reviewed everything, partly in the process of studying to prepare to take the SAT again, but then also to prepare for my calculus. And I got an A+ in calculus. Okay, so I just tell you that because I went from flunking a stupid statistics class that wasn't even an honors class at my high school to getting an A+ in a college calculus class. And the only thing that had changed was my attitude, and that I prepared before the class started. So don't sell yourself short. Having good study skills and all these little tricks here, it increases your IQ like at least 30 points. All these college professors who tell you can't increase IQ, they're stupid. To me, the word college professor is almost like a synonym for stupid. And you'll say, well, how could I say that? I say that because they say what is untrue and wrong all the time. They tell people there's nothing you can do. You have a fixed IQ. That's completely untrue. And it's completely obvious that I'm right. All you have to do is read the night before the class. You'll know the abbreviations. You'll have a general idea of the material. Because you know the abbreviations, you can keep up with the lecture, and you will be a better student. So right there, just by studying the night before, you've increased your IQ, your academic IQ for that test. Sit in the front row so you're not distracted. You've increased your IQ for that class. Have condensed notes. I'm also going to teach you about walk and talk. That's a real powerful technique. So just by knowing what to do, your academic IQ improves. All right. And then people say, well, that's not IQ. Those are just, behavioral things. Well, duh. Okay. What is academic performance? It's how you perform on a test. And people will tell you, well, your IQ is based on what you get on your SAT, your ACT, or some other standardized test. And I'm like, well, this improves test performance. Therefore, it improves IQ. Okay. It's just a fact. And the guy, Binet, who invented the IQ test, he said the exact same thing. A person who is diligent and prepares for their exams and to develop their brain, they will increase their IQ. I mean, what is IQ? It's like measuring how well you compete academically to other similar persons. Okay. All right. Let's see. Find out the books, study the books for the class, and figure out what the best book is. Ask the older students. They'll often tell you what the best textbook is. If you have a good book, that will help you in the class, increase your academic IQ for that class. Usually the shorter books are better. You have to have a good index, well illustrated. Always buy at least one question book. What are you going to be tested on? Doing questions. So buy question books and do the practice questions. I would never test myself with a question book. I would simply memorize. I'd circle all the correct answers and then memorize them. I didn't want to stress myself out. They always make them harder than they should be. We talked about pre-reading the night before. That's a very powerful technique. Nowadays, with the internet, you can watch online videos the night before to get the class vocabulary, get the general idea, the abbreviations, so you can take notes. Your goal is to make the class like a review. If you do that, you'll be amazed at how much better you learn. Always go to class on time. Always sit in the front row. Okay. My freshman year of med school, I lived at home with my parents, and it was a problem because I would have to commute to class. Sometimes I would sleep in late. I'd miss the first class. Then I would miss the handout. I would miss being told there was a quiz on a certain day. That was partly how I ended up getting 10% on my first set of midterms. After that, I crushed everything, but that was my learning lesson. Approach to class. Always sit in the front row. Take good detailed notes. Use abbreviations so you can keep up. It's almost like having a shorthand. Later on, you'll often remember things. You'll hear the teacher's voice in your head, then fill that in with your notes. For studying, you got to optimize motivation. That's why I went through all that stuff about, and I'm going to go through more. How do you get yourself psyched up? So like I said, my goal was to someday become a I wasn't just taking biology hoping I get a good grade. I figured I'm going to become a great biologist someday. Someday I'll make a discovery, I'll figure things out, and I'll be a hero in a sense. Because when you think that way, you get a big increase in energy, and you just absorb the material because it's not just for a class and for the test, it's for the future of your career. And that motivation makes you a lot better. Okay. And also, the best students, like those guys I was going birdwatch, one was a professional biologist, naturalist, and the other guy was getting A pluses. Okay. So I'm hanging out with those guys, and, I became a much better student, and we're having conversations. Average students simply try to memorize their notes. Okay. The great students, they can converse about the material. Okay. I wanted to understand ecology. That's why I wrote the field guide, okay, for the Palo Alto Baylands. All right, internal motivation for self-development and goals. It's stronger than just trying to get a good grade because, your parents want you to, okay, for an external reward. It came from inside. I wanted to redeem myself as being a failed athlete to become a great doctor or scientist. So I was going to push. I felt my entire life depended on that. I would forgive myself. I'd be happy again. Things would click for me. Life would get good again. I'd have more friends again. Everything would be good. It's kind of like in my mind's eye what I hope for. Biochemistry, for example, a lot of people, biochemistry is like the most difficult subject in medical school. And so people see it as this big challenge. And what I'm trying to say is the way I phrased biochemistry in my mind's eye, I saw it as that is a language of God that he uses to write the book of life. And if I'm going to be a great doctor or scientist, I must know biochemistry well. So I love biochemistry. And I would get psyched up for it. At first, I was very intimidated because it was difficult for me. And I'd be kind of overwhelmed by the lecture. After the first 10 minutes, I couldn't keep up with the speaker anymore. But once I started pre-reading the night before, I would read 4 hours the night before. I bought 4 biochemistry textbooks. I had them all on my desk. And I would look at let's say, a biochemical cycle, glycolysis, and I'd say, how can I memorize this? What is the irreducible minimum from which I can derive a mnemonic to memorize the whole thing? And, you look at glycolysis for a while and you come to the conclusion it's the phosphate. So then I would make a phone number out of the phosphate. And I would just memorize that phone number. And from that, I could derive the whole thing. Glucose comes into the cell. It's phosphorylated, glucose 6-phosphate. Then it's isomerized, okay, to fructose 6-phosphate. Okay, then you add another phosphate to make it symmetric, fructose 1,6-diphosphate. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is I would also walk around in circles in my house, my apartment, and I would just start talking to myself. What I was trying to do, I call it the walk and talk. After I'd study for a while, whatever the time might be, let's say for an hour or something, I would close the book, and I would just walk around my house, my apartment, wherever I was at, and just start talking to myself. Like, this is glycolysis. Glucose comes from the blood. It's then taken into the cell. It's phosphorylated, trap it into the cell. And then, it's converted into fructose 6-phosphate. The reason I'm doing that is if you can say everything, you have to reconstruct the material. You have to bring it all together and say it out loud. The speaking part of your brain is making a copy of that information. The hearing part of your brain is copying that information. You are actively interacting with the material. You will memorize it much better. As you get older and you get more experience, you can start to analyze the book. Well, this book explains glycolysis better for such and such a reason. What else can I know about it? What are, they seldom teach you inhibitors, but it's good to learn inhibitors. What are the inhibitors of glycolysis? That's more advanced thinking. But anyways, the more you're able to analyze the material, judge the material, interact with it, theorize about it, the better you will know it. Okay. Let's see. The other thing too is, like, my father would say things to me that would motivate me. I was a little pissed off at my father. And one time I felt like dropping a biology class. That was actually, my mother got on my case, and she says, "You are a wimp. Your father worked so hard. He grew up on a house with a dirt floor, and now you want to quit your class. You are a wimp. I am embarrassed of you." And so that motivated me not to drop the class. And I did remember that. My father would also talk to me kind of rough. He'd say, "You know what?" He goes, "You're spoiled. You're freaking lazy." He goes, "Let me tell you something. Lots of guys are getting drafted and sent to the front line of Vietnam, okay? They don't get to go to college. You get to go to college, sit around all day twirling a pencil. You should be damn grateful. Just shut up and do your work." So that was kind of the gentle talk my father gave me. And I knew he was right, okay? I was lucky to have the opportunity to get educated. So I was a pretty motivated guy. That's why I would get out of my chair in the morning, out of my bed in the morning, and then I would study as much as I could take. I'd take a little break for, to eat lunch, do my laundry, to work out, go to wrestling practice or something. But I was intensely motivated to study. I would write in my books like crazy. I don't know if you can see my book here. I'll just show you. Here's Caldwell Esselstyn's book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. I got all these tabs on the pages. I would then write all these notes in the back of it, in the front of it. And that'd be typically how I read a book. So I'd have all the information in one spot. Nowadays, you can save slides, whatever. But I'm just showing you that would be how I could do it. Because people all ask me, how can you memorize all these books? Well, because I have the notes. And if I want to look something up in the book, I go back to it and I look at my notes again. I'll put in the back of the book, I'll summarize the back of the book. Okay, here's a good finding on page 10, a great finding on page 20, a great finding on page 30. And I'd be able to go back to it and know all the key points in the book. So whenever I take a study break, I would call it doing a walk and talk. And it's also called a self-test. And that's what I meant by I would talk to myself. If I'm going to get some lunch, do some laundry, go to the bathroom, I sit there and I talk to myself. Okay, in glycolysis, it's like this. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And by always talking to myself, I would memorize it very well. And I'd be able to articulate everything. When I was around my family later on, when I finally had a girlfriend again, they would make fun of me. They go, look at you, you crazy person talking to yourself. And I'd be like, you don't understand. This is the secret of being first in the class, is talking to oneself. Okay. It's the most powerful study technique. It's called a verbal self-test. So verbally, I repeat back everything. And that's why I would be so confident. I never did an all-nighter. I never did an all-nighter my whole academic career. I never took caffeine or any stimulant. I would just know that I know the material. I can sit there and articulate everything. What's to worry about? I have it all in my mind. I can articulate the whole thing. I'm ready to go. Okay. So, and also, like I said, I would start studying, first day, if not before the class even started. So I had paid my dues, because a lot of people, they crank, the last couple of weeks before the test, they do all-nighters, and then they kind of have half-assed results, versus I wasn't pretending to know the material or trying to memorize for the test. I knew the material. So and I focused on learning, so it was kind of fun for me most of the time, versus a lot of people, all they want is the grade. If all you want is the grade, then it's a chore. Versus if you want to learn and be a true expert, then because you want to learn, it's sort of natural to learn it. So I really enjoyed a lot of the academic part of my studies. The other thing is, I was very confident and comfortable with the idea that you have to teach yourself. Because one of the things people are shocked when they go to college and grad school is how bad many of the professors are. And like the first year of med school, it's like amazing how bad the professors are. In most medical schools, you ask any medical school, they'll tell you their first year professors stink. They're not even bad, they stink. And a lot of times there are people who are just like professors who are put out to pasture. They can't do useful research anymore. And university says, teach the medical students or we're going to fire you. So they don't even want to be there, and they half-ass everything and just read out of the book. So what it means, though, is the student often has to teach themselves. And there's a lot of volume of work. So you just have to be ready to teach yourself and get used to it. Okay, we talked about condensed notes, talked about making mnemonics. The Feynman technique is a lot of times what I use when I want to teach myself something that's not in any book. I just start writing my own book. And I'll show you. As a matter of fact, my biochemistry notes are a lot like that. I don't know if you can show this up here. This is when I was trying to review some biochemistry stuff. And I would just make a table of contents on the inner hardcover, and I would review all the biochemistry material. They have it all in one place. And this is when I was trying to review some biochemistry material on my own, going back to a subject that I had been away from for over 10 years. I'll show you another notebook, the kind of stuff I like to do. My mother died of cancer, and I felt bad because I had learned Spanish good enough that I could interview a patient and I could chat a little bit with my mom, but really not so good. And I hadn't practiced for many, many years. So I decided to upgrade my Spanish because it reminded me of my mother. I was very close with my mother. And I made this entire songbook of all the popular Spanish songs. And I would translate them from English back to Spanish and back and forth. And so this is a whole book of Spanish music translations. It's great. I love Spanish music. It's really good. It's amazingly good. And I tabbed all the indices on it. Because what I learned was the way to learn Spanish language is to read bilingual fairy tales. And you think of it this way. If imagine your kid or you wants to learn Spanish. What the typical situation is, they take a class in school and the teacher teaches them all this grammar, asks them grammar questions. But it's a joke because when the semester is over, they forget everything. There's no kid that learns their first language through grammar. You learn a language by communicating in the language, by doing something meaningful. So what I'm saying is you can learn the basic vocabulary words and get right into reading bilingual fairy tales because it's very useful, high yield vocabulary with pictures and familiar stories. And then you move up from the bilingual fairy tales to reading like personal motivation things, like Brian Tracy in Spanish, okay? And then what I found was sort of the coup de grace for learning Spanish was I read Da Vinci Code in English and in Spanish, and I listened to all 16 audio CDs, and I can understand everything. And that's when I was sort of happy that I got my Spanish to a decent level. Unfortunately, I haven't had much time to practice, so I'm rusty. But I did get interviewed. There was this guy, Tolosa or something like that, Gustavo Tolosa or something. And we had a lot of fun, but I think I kind of scared him. I'm kind of intimidating to a lot of people in the science, academic, nutrition world. That's why I say I'm the bad boy of veganism, okay? I think he got a little nervous when I told him that I've rewritten all the medical textbooks, which I have done, in all the internal medicine textbooks, including the internal medicine subspecialties. So that was a little bit funny. Okay, so anyways, though, getting back to these study skills, I talked about the magic bathroom. I would make a schedule. I would put a schedule on a calendar of what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't take it that seriously, and I didn't always use it. But when I had to really get organized and time was limited, I would make sure I knew exactly ballpark what I was studying and what time to make sure I covered all the topics so I didn't leave anything out, like when I'm getting ready for final exams in med school. You need good bookshelves. You should only put all the books that go for one thing should all be in one spot together. All the biology books in one spot, all the chemistry in one spot, all the biochemistry in another spot. That way you keep them organized. And if you should have to move, make sure you label all the boxes where you put your books in so you can get everything up and going again at your new place very quickly. When eating dinners by yourself, watch videos on the topic. Use the print screen button to save good images. You can make a file of all the images related to a given topic. For health habits, it's good to exercise at least a little bit every day. I like to lift weights at least once a week. If you like running and you got a place to run, whatever works for you. But people who exercise, they become smarter. They just do. You don't want to overdo it. Now, I'm not saying become a professional athlete. If your goal is academics, you don't want to do what a professional athlete would do. For example, professional athletes often work out first thing in the morning. I don't like to do that. First thing in the morning, I want to get going academically. You're smartest right when you first wake up in the morning because your brain's just cleaned itself. The lymphatic system, all your neurons have had their waste products rinsed away. And because of that, you want to get down and sit in your desk and start studying, cranking, because you build up enthusiasm, momentum, you get interested in something, and quickly 3 hours will have gone by while you're focused on a subject, and you get tons of work done that way. Versus if you're out running around, taking a shower, you don't want to eat breakfast. Eating breakfast, I think, is kind of stupid for academics. All that stuff about breakfast is the most important meal. That's a bunch of nonsense by the company that made breakfast foods to advertise their breakfast foods. You want to study, okay? Trust me on that one. I know a lot about studying, a lot about cranking out books. And like what I would do too is some of my heroes like Robert Piercy, who wrote a magnificent book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He would go to sleep early, then he could wake up early so he'd have more morning time. You are smartest in that morning time. That's the time when you want to crank out a publication. What else? Eat healthy, low fat, low sodium, organic food. Don't ever cook on aluminum stuff because it causes brain damage. Avoid high fructose corn syrup. It's often contaminated with mercury. Avoid processed food in general. There's tons of bad things in there. Fungal inhibitors are often mitochondrial inhibitors. You don't want to drink alcohol. I don't even have a drop of alcohol. No tobacco, no MJ, no other drugs. They're all BS. No stimulants. There's no such thing as a nootropic brain stimulant that actually works. Watch out for all the toxins they put in food. There's so many bad things they put on food nowadays. Like I would never eat an avocado anymore. I don't even eat apples anymore because I'm worried about this AP, L stuff. Okay. It's really bad. It's much worse than people realize. I read the chem data sheets on it. So having a healthy diet matters. Drink healthy water. Like I would never drink tap water. They routinely put F- and Al in there. They're both neurotoxins. Okay. And the Al and the F- together causes increased absorption, increased traversal of the blood-brain barrier. These things in conjunction with the high fructose corn syrup, HG, mercury, they make you stupid, okay? The glyphosate's also an excitotoxin, the stuff sprayed on GMO soy. You want to avoid all that crap. No caffeine. It's best to have no caffeine. Caffeine's a minor toxin, but it's still a toxin. Avoid obnoxious people, rude people, stupid people who stress you out because you want to get your sleep. You don't want to waste time with stupid people. You don't want to hang around with stupid people. A lot of people, some people are nice and pleasant, and they're stupid, and then you can hang around with them briefly. But people who are obnoxious or bad or are going to get you into bad habits like drinking alcohol or something, or smoking cigarettes or marijuana or any of this BS, stay away from those people. If you want to be a high achiever, you really can't hang around with jerks. And if they're in your family, then be polite to them, but avoid them to the extent that you can. All of these bad habits, they lower IQ. Don't do anything with head trauma. So No sport where you're getting hit in the head. They're all bad. Anything where you get hit in the head is bad for your brain. Avoid smelly things. Anything that smells strong is usually toxic for your brain. Quite often, anything that smells bad is a SERCA inhibitor, sarcoplasm, endoplasmic reticulum, calcium ATPase. So that includes paint, car exhaust. Diesel's worse than regular auto, factory exhaust, insect repellents, deodorant sprays. All of these things are neurotoxic. So you want to avoid all these things. Don't go to dry cleaner. I won't go to dry cleaner anymore because I don't want to smell that crap in there, like the TCE, trichloroethylene, for example. Never listen to beat music or grunge music. Beat music and grunge music make people stupid. I usually, when I study, I want the area silent. I'll wear ear protectors to make it even quieter. If you have to listen to music for whatever reason, the best music for studying, if you're going to, I like silence, but if you're going to listen to music, it would be Baroque music, things like Bach. Bach's the best. But you know what? Handel's pretty good. Handel's fireworks music, Handel's water music, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, Arcangelo Corelli, Telemann. That's all a Baroque music, sort of with a pleasant beat that you could, not beat, a pleasant melody that, and they're instrumentals. Nothing with words. Words are bad for when you're studying because they will distract you. You can't help hearing them. If you have to use music, you can do that. Okay, like if somebody's being noisy in the room next to you, you might use that as almost like a form of white noise. Or you could put on an air filter or something. Keep your cell phone far from your body. Don't be holding your cell phone up to your head. It opens up voltage-gated calcium channels, which is a mild excitotoxin effect. Better to hardwire your computer than the Wi-Fi. Do not have a Wi-Fi router right next to your head, or especially not next to your bed. Choose an apartment where you do not have a cell phone tower next to you. Consider an EMF shield around your bed. I made a video about that. These are all some of the things that make you a more powerful student. This is my office where I write. And you can see I got tons of books. I own thousands of books because, like I said, I already told you I read 3 books a week, a minimum, 150 books a year. And when I had more time, I would read more than that. So anyways, I just have piles of books upon books. And then here, this is in the basement. And then my wife's dog pisses on the floor upstairs, and the piss drops through the floor into my, and gets on my, some of my books. I got to keep them covered up with paper towels or plastic or stuff. You know, and that's what people say to me, oh, isn't it glamorous to be a Harvard-trained doctor? Yeah, right. I'm lower than the dog in my house. But I still enjoy all this academic work. I like having my own little office. And I had a little joke with my wife. You know, we had a big discussion many years ago about who was going to get the parent bedroom and the parent closet and the parent bathroom. With regard to what I'm getting at is, I specifically wanted to constantly go up and down stairs because I knew I'd get tons of exercise from that, where she wanted to be as lazy as possible. And so by getting all that extra exercise, I get a lot more exercise. I wrote a book about how to raise IQ and become a genius. And this was after I'd raised my own kids and done a lot of tutoring. People will send their kids to me saying, oh, Billy's having a problem in school. I got a lot of guys who will come to me if they flunked their boards, and I'll help them with academics. I have a doctor friend who flunked his boards 5 times, came and studied with me a couple of times. He passed his boards because there's a way to approach academics. I've thought about this for many years. And one of the things, too, is it's good to, here's a quote by Mozart, love, 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 that is the source of genius. And here he is talking to King Joseph about his new idea for an opera for the Marriage of Figaro. And he's all excited. And Mozart, that's why Mozart was so great. He loved composing music. He said, I am immersed in music, even though he went through some very difficult time. Another concept I would give you is like what makes somebody a great student. And this is what I saw in my friend, too, Jay Ream. He basically, this is a book by Goethe. This is Johann von Wolfgang Goethe. This guy was a genius, German genius. He's kind of like what Shakespeare is to English. That's what he is to the German language. And he wrote this book called The Sorrows of Young Werther. He was very sad when a girl who he loved broke up with him. Okay. And so Werther was in love with this girl named Charlotte. But Charlotte was probably planning to marry another guy who was just away for a year or two. And he had a friend named Wilhelm. There was no cell phones in that day. And he would write letters to Wilhelm all the time about Charlotte. Oh, I love Charlotte, the way she walks, the way she talks, the way she interacts with her siblings, the way she dresses, the sound of her voice. And what I'm trying to say is, if you fall in love with biology the way that Werther was in love with Charlotte, you will be great at biology. So see the beauty in it. See God's handwork in it. See the incredible design of it. Okay, biology, biochemistry, molecular biology. You'll get great at it. So having that love for your subject, it makes you a much better performer. And then realize you're in it for the long haul. And so what I say is, when you first look at a subject, you look at the picture book for whatever it is, biology, anatomy, or something. It's rather spectacular and it's fun, and you kind of dream of being an expert. And then you start to take the classes and the advanced classes, and there's a long, tedious grind. And that can get boring at times and frustrating. But then you'll hit another point where you have to apply the material, and that can be very fun. You might be frustrated that you're not where you want to be yet, but you'll still see some real world application and progress. And then this, I'm kind of like, comparing it to studying through college and med school, let's say, then doing residency and being able to do things under supervision. Then you're an attending and you're functioning as a doctor independently, and you're going to have some new challenge and you're going to have some progress. But what I see is most people stagnate right about here. They learn what they need to do to generate the billing codes, and they go, okay, I know what I need to know to get paid, to not get sued, and I'll just leave it at that. There's very few doctors that continue getting educated after they've just had a little bit of time done with their residency or fellowship. And the reason is most education in medicine's fake. You go to a continuing medical education meeting, CME, you just sign the attendance, you get all the credits. And even if you attended the lecture, so what? It's run by Big Pharma. They're just going to tell you to sell their drug. So what I'm saying, though, is if a person decides they want to keep on getting educated, and I made the commitment to do this, there's a lot of struggle. And when you start discovering new things in medicine, people don't say, thank you, that's great. They get pissed off at you because you're going to change the paradigm, maybe create more work for people or cause somebody to lose money. But intellectually, it's a lot of fun. But that's what it's like. Okay, if you just take the usual path, it's kind of boring and you don't keep educating yourself. You can turn into a Gomer doc where you really start not knowing anything except how to generate billing codes. And a lot of what it's like in academics is like Sadak in Search of the Waters of Forgetting, this painting by John Martin. He basically has to, fingertip climb these rocks till he gets to the top. This is also reminiscent of Prometheus when he climbed Mount Olympus to seize the fire, steal the fire, and give it to the people. But anyways, what I show you is just be prepared. This is what it's like to have a great academic career. You have to constantly challenge yourself to keep on scaling the next hill or little mini mountain on your way to the top of the big mountain, and just how it is. And it's very reminiscent of the hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell. When you talk about the hero of the famous stories of literature, they have the happy world of their childhood, and then they have a terrible setback where they're thrown in the gutter, in the pit of failure, the abyss of near death, depression, loss of hope, and then they have to start climbing out of it. And it's often 2 steps up, 1 step back, 2 step up, 1 step back. And you find coaches and mentors and role models and friends, and you kind of work your way back up, and you'll often still have more setbacks. But that's what it's like. You have to accept the fact there's going to be ups and downs. Very few are lucky enough to have smooth sailing and a quick climb to the top. No, it's constant setbacks, frustrations, failures, disappointments. And again, I love like the story of Thucydides, fired from the Athenian Navy, and instead of just being sad about it, he went and wrote the best Greek historic book ever written. And look what Thucydides said: my history has been composed to be an everlasting possession, not the showpiece of an hour. This book is written not for the applause of the moment, but to be a gift to mankind for all time. That's the proper attitude. So that's not going to guarantee you get any money for it, but that's going to help you to do great work. This painting is Pericles' funeral oration, and there's the Acropolis, the great buildings in Athens, magnificent. If you want to study the 3 greatest periods in the history of the world for cultural history are the ancient Greeks, the Italian Renaissance, and then the Victorian age, the Victorian Renaissance and the Catholic Revival in the 1800s, especially in England, but in other countries. Okay, another thing I would say, if you want to really be good at academics and stuff, learn whatever you have to do that's conventional. And don't get me wrong, if you're speaking in front of a bunch of professors on your PhD thesis and you're trying to get tenure, then be prim and proper and do what they expect you to do. But if you want to be able to be an interesting speaker, you have to be able to push into connecting things and making it interesting. And I think you should tell jokes. You should make metaphors and other things, because that's how we actually remember and learn things, and that makes it more interesting. And I call this like my style of speaking. Is I'll start with basic stuff everybody should know, throw in some interesting stuff, connect a couple of different areas, and I call that an AO, academic orgasm. And then I'll come back down to earth so to make sure that everybody in the room can understand it. Maybe only the more experienced people are going to understand the advanced stuff, but I'll keep on coming back down to earth. And that makes a talk, in my opinion, a lot more interesting. But you have to go there. And sometimes people get offended when you go to a higher level. When I got done with college, I came back to my home area, and my brother would make fun of me that I had become such a nerd because all I did was study and wrestle. And like my brother was a really good looking guy. He was like Mr. Good looking. So like this is about accurate what I was like compared to my brother. And so he would try to take me to learn how to be more social again. He's always teasing me, calling me Rain Man or autistic. And he said, like, Pete, you can't dress like that. Pete, you got to do this. Here's what you say when you go here. So it was kind of funny. And anyways, I noticed that almost no one was interested in science or reading books or anything. So I memorized all these comedian routines. And I found that as a good way to joke around people. People like telling jokes. I then also, all the books I would read, I would memorize the quotes, and I made a computer file of all the jokes, of all the quotes. I would do a Feynman method for whatever topic I was interested in, where you write down everything you learn about a topic and organize it. And in so doing, you learn that topic pretty well. That's a good thing for anybody to do on nutrition. Do a Feynman method for diabetes, for hypertension, atherosclerosis. In a sense, you write your own mini book on the subject, and therefore you organize all the information relevant to you on that subject. And so I kept all these files. So I have thousands of pages of jokes, of quotes from great authors. And I also collected all these paintings. I have thousands of them because I love all that stuff. And I secretly hoped, even when I was younger, that I would become a writer because I really wanted to be a writer. I sort of saw that as a great creative outlet. I was a little bored in conventional medicine, Don't get me wrong, not initially. Initially, it was quite exciting. But now, as I've gotten older, I've done all that stuff. I've been a doctor over 30 years. And like I said, too, these were things that in the process of trying to fix my own problems, like being a little socially awkward, my brother would tease me, but first you say hello, then you say, how you doing? That developed my ability to be a much better writer and a speaker. I love the comedians because everybody enjoys the great comedians, Sam Kinison, Eddie Murphy. They were so funny back in the 1980s, Rodney Dangerfield. Nowadays, all these phony scumbags are offended by everything. They're jerks. They don't let anybody talk. But we used to have a lot of fun. And I think, like, look at Plato as a good example of somebody being too stuck up. Somebody asked Plato, what is a man and what is a human? He said, a human is a featherless biped. Then Diogenes plucked the chicken and he said, behold, Plato's idea of a man, a featherless biped. So anyways, I wrote books on how to write better because I wanted to teach myself how to write. I read everything you could read about how to write. I summarized it. I wrote a book on all the great philosophers and scholars because I found that was the way I could remember the great thinkers, the great philosophers, the great historians, the heroes of the different ages, was by memorizing their quotes. So I have like 5,000 pages of quotes on my own personal notes, but I made about a 700-page book of it. I loved all the paintings, and I feel like society is drifting into barbarism. So I made my book, The Best Christian Art, which is especially all the paintings, but also the music, the movies, the literature. So that's how you do things. Another thing, too, to remember about becoming a great scholar is even the smartest man in the world could be easily tricked by a woman. I'm almost done here, but just a couple more. Aristotle was sort of the mentor coach to Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great greatly admired Aristotle as the smartest man in the world. Aristotle's girlfriend's name was Phyllis. And all the men, the generals, the soldiers, they said, Phyllis is having a really bad influence on Alexander. She's messing him up. So they told Aristotle, tell Alexander to break up with Phyllis. She's bad for him. And they finally got Aristotle convinced to do it. He told Alexander to dump her, and he did. And then Phyllis found out about it and was pissed off at Aristotle. So to get revenge, she kept flirting with Aristotle. And she finally got him to the point where she could ask him, can he get down on all fours? And then she told Alexander to be hiding behind a tree, and he watched him while she rode him like a horse and spanked his bottom. So it's kind of a joke, but what I'm trying to say is even the smartest man in the world can easily be tricked by a woman. So you guys have to watch out for that. As far as exercise, like at my old house, the house I loved before my wife forced me to move away from it, I had a wall for hitting tennis balls against there. We had a basketball court. I put this net behind it, so when we hit the tennis ball, it wouldn't go in the neighbor's yard. One day I came home from work, and my kid asked me, he said, you're a bad parent. You don't help me with basketball. I put a basketball court inside my house. That was great. These are just ways to get exercise. Hydrate before you orate. You speak better. Beet juice is great. If you drink 32 ounces of beet juice about 2 hours before a talk or 2 hours before you lift weights, you got a lot more energy. You're smarter. You're stronger. The words come faster. I know from performance because I track my weightlifting. I'm a lot stronger when I drink that. Taking a nap helps too. I chase it down with water. Eat the low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet. They don't get any of these diseases. You eat the high-fat diets, you end up being screwed. Excessive sodium screws you up. The Indian diet screwed up for all the fried food. Other than that, it would be okay. The fat sticks the red blood cells together, so your blood's thick. It drops your oxygen perfusion. It decreases athletic performance. Causes leaky gut problems. I know I'm going on a long time here. Excessive calcium coming into the axon terminal activates it. This is why you don't want cell phones, because it activates that. You don't want caffeine. You don't want unnecessary stress. You don't want sleep deprivation. You don't want aspartame. All of these things overactivate this neuron, as well as any stimulant for attention deficit, etc. And it's going to throw off your cognitive performance. You don't want to eat any processed food. It's full of mitochondrial inhibitors. Be very careful about any medicine you take. Tons of medicines people don't even realize that are neurotoxic. I already told you all the psych meds are neurotoxic: SSRIs, antidepressants, antipsychotics, Haldol, etc. That's my theory of dementia. We're not going to have time to go into it, but bottom line is when you increase your metabolic rate, or you decrease your glucose oxygen delivery, or you inhibit your mitochondria, your brain cells are more likely to become dysfunctional or die. I wrote an entire book about how to prevent dementia. I've written, like I said, a couple of books on study skills and how to increase IQ. I know I've been going on a long time, so I won't say too much more, but these are all things to avoid. You can hit the print screen if you want to save these slides, just because I've kind of gone on so long, so I won't drag it out too much. But 6 blind men and an elephant, or 5 blind men and an elephant. Basically, this is what happens when you encounter a new intellectual challenge. You start out by only knowing a small part of it. Like the first blind guy grabs the elephant tail, says it's a rope. Second guy touches the side, says it's a wall. The one who touches his ear says it's a rug. And the point of the matter is you want to be like a bird's eye view from above, so you can see all the different points of view. And then what that means is you have to read multiple different points of view on a subject. You have to listen to people with different viewpoints, and then you start to figure out what it really is. And you end up like with this picture here. This is by David Caspar Friedrich, Wanderer Above the Sea Fog, where you have a bird's eye view looking down on it in an objective way, and then you can really master the subject. That's what you want to achieve. Whenever somebody disagrees with me and my family, I just tell them we have a Hollingsworth problem. Hollingsworth was a psychologist who worked with children with very high IQs. And if there was a more than a 30 IQ gap, the subject, the smarter person would seem like a weirdo or a nerd to the less informed person. And the better informed kid would think the other person was being dull. So basically, whenever somebody calls me autistic or weird, that's what I just tell them. I think we have a Hollingsworth gap in my family. These are just little definitions of all this intelligence stuff. Here's some quotes on IQ and stuff. I don't want to go on too long, but that's basically the gist of it. I can't hear you yet. I think your microphone's muted.
Okay, so much great information. Thank you so much. It was a lot of the things that you talked about, especially towards the end, you had included in some of your presentations that you did on Be Green with Amy. And we have a playlist of Dr. Rogers' presentations. So you can go into each of those and get more detail of some of the things that he breezed through at the end. But there was quite a lot of information and very, very helpful. And we do have some questions and comments. So, and Jennifer Diamond said, thank you so much. Lots of information. Wow. Okay, let's see what we've got. I was asking people to tell us in the comments if they ever struggled in school, and Carrie said, I still struggle. And I guess that's why she was watching. And Colleen said, math was not my thing, even simple math, forget algebra, etc. Guess what I do now? Math. Okay, and then we have a question from Jennifer. Jennifer want to know, if you line an aluminum pan with either a silpat or parchment paper, is it safe to use them?
I would not use an aluminum cookware. I would just get different cookware.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would worry, it's going to tear, maybe this food's going to contact it. I wouldn't want aluminum on my food at all. Aluminum is major neurotoxin. They'll often put aluminum in the center. Let's say you get a stainless steel pot. There might be aluminum in the middle layer, but you don't want it in touch with your food. That's why you don't want to stir a pot with a metal spoon and scratch it, because you could scratch down the aluminum and then get aluminum in your food. But yeah, I wouldn't use that. I wouldn't use iron either. I use stainless steel. Theoretically, some people say titanium might be good, and maybe it is, but I don't know if any of that's getting in the food or not. They use titanium for a lot of internal prostheses in patients when they put in, artificial hip and spine surgery and stuff. But I would cook on stainless steel, and I would never scratch it with metal. That's what I would do.
Okay. And I've also seen people use the parchment paper strategy when they use aluminum foil. Like, let's say they made a big pan kind of meal and they wanted to cover it when it was in the oven, and they didn't want to use the aluminum foil. So they would put the parchment paper on top and then the aluminum foil on top of that, just to keep it from flying up in the oven What do you
Well,
think about that?
parchment paper, wax paper in contact with food is a lot better than aluminum, but I would just not use the aluminum. And
Mhm.
another thing too, I'll say is people sometimes say, well, I'm too over the top or I'm too extreme or whatever. Why do I always want to push to the utmost? And the reason I believe it's worth it to do that is if I do that, then I always get the best possible result. Okay. So, like I said, if I try to be the first in the class, the best student in the class, try to know the material as well as the teacher, then I'm probably going to get an A. I might not get an A plus, but I'm going to get an A. And I'm also talking about health. I try to do everything as best I can given the circumstances, and that way I'll get the best possible result I could get. And the reason I'm going through all this is because I know how lots of people are. They have a tendency to sort of half-ass things, and what they don't realize is a lot of times they end up worse than they thought they were going to be. So it's all my attitude is like, whatever you know, do the best you can with it, because there's also going to be problems that you don't know about. Kind of like going back to that old quote: "There's the known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns." And every known, fix it, compensate for the problems you don't even realize you're going to have.
Yeah, that makes sense, and also a lot of us have been going decades with exposure to nonstick and aluminum and things, so we have a lot of, years to make up for all the exposure that we have had, so I guess being very diligent would be very smart to do. About supplies, Amy, can you ask Dr. Rogers about pesticides and herbicide commonly found in beans and the arsenic in U.S. grown organic rice?
Okay, well, first of all, I only eat organic food, and I know it's not perfect, but it's better than non-organic food. And they've done a whole bunch of things where they tested pesticides in adults and kids and found there's a lot more pesticide residues in people who do not eat organic. So there is a proven benefit from it, even though I know it's not perfect. Okay, then there's other things like whether or not it's organic, let's say for beans. If the beans are organic, they're not allowed to spray glyphosate on them, also called glyphosate. And like in Canada, they'll often spray it intentionally with glyphosate soon before the harvest. It gets them apparently to drop the leaves or something, make it easier to harvest. So I would not want that. What's the deal with arsenic? Well, they used to use arsenic for cotton. Cotton was a textile product, let's say in the southeastern United States, because they had a problem with boll weevil insect infestation. And so they could also spray high amounts of it because it's a textile product rather than a food product. And what that did is it put arsenic into the soil of a lot of the southeastern states in the United States. So when they grow rice there now, that's going to have higher arsenic. You can try to buy it from states where they didn't use that arsenic. But even the states that didn't use it, they still have a little bit of problem because of the chicken. Chicken had intestinal parasites that were causing them to not gain weight. So they would give the chicken arsenic antibiotics to treat the intestinal parasite. And then the chicken feces, they sold that to the rice farmers, even in the better states, so to speak, for growing rice. So it got into the rice as well, but it's pretty low. Some of the places will tell you the amount of arsenic in their rice. You can check it on their website. So be a little careful about that. But even still, be that as it may, arsenic is, an inhibitor of glycolysis, is an inhibitor of, Krebs cycle. But at the beginning of Krebs cycle, it's still a relatively mild problem. What I'll do is I'll eat white rice instead of brown rice because the white rice has less arsenic. You get rid of some of the fiber, some of the fat, and you get rid of the arsenic as well. Rinse it in water at least once, if not twice. Reverse osmosis water is what I do. And, Dr. McDougall said never in his life did he ever see an arsenic toxicity case. I've never seen one either. It's probably there in a subclinical form, but it's rare that it's significant. I know a lot of people that eat a lot of rice. Like I know a lady doctor. She's as skinny as a toothpick, okay? She's about 40 years of age. I know a technologist who eats rice all the time every day, and he doesn't eat organic. He just buys it off the shelf of the store. And he's as skinny as it gets because only 1% of the calories are fat in white rice. So I actually think white rice is good. I eat white rice about 5 times a week. I like it. I've never had a problem with it. I've never had a cognitive problem from it, not that I'm aware of. So I think it's still a good food. And there's a lot more arsenic in some other foods, but they don't get the publicity because it was almost like a chance for the paleo keto carnivore group to jump on rice and make this giant big fuss about it. So that's how I approach that.
Okay. Cardsia want to know advice for cancer. Cachexia kills over 20% of cancer patients, poorly evaluated, treated. Ever a reason to add animal protein if patient too disabled to do aerobic exercise, living with progressive uterine cancer, plant-based, low oil, but still losing more muscle.
Yeah, well, I would try to figure out some way to do whatever exercise was possible. I would do that because that's the best thing for keeping on muscle mass. Animal protein, you know, isolated animal protein would either be a supplement or, skim milk is a little bit close to that. But animal protein has a lot of things about it that are carcinogenic. There's the whole activation of mTOR stuff because there's more methionine and there's more leucine. One could try to be very low in iron. That might be one way to try to slow mTOR down because mTOR needs all of those things. Because basically, to replicate a cancer cell, you need to make a copy of it. To make a copy of it, you got 3.3 billion base pairs in your DNA. So you got to make a copy of all that. You got enzymes which need iron, so you need iron for that. You need lipids to make all the membranes of the organelles and the plasma membrane. So you would want to do what you could to slow that down. I kind of wonder about giving anabolic steroids to cancer patients. I wonder if maybe they should, because they always forbid testosterone all over the place. And I sometimes wonder what is the reason they forbid testosterone? Because they want all these guys to feel weak and sick so they can sell them a bunch of other drugs. I wonder if they shouldn't be given away. Yeah, they try to hype up, it increases the risk of atherosclerosis. I don't know exactly how much it does. What I'm basically saying here is I think testosterone is overly frowned upon compared to what it should be. And what do you give a person? What does a college football player take if he wants to be big and strong? He takes testosterone. So you got all these weak patients. Shouldn't we maybe be giving them some testosterone? I actually think we should. I think that testosterone has been vilified much more than it deserves because they don't want people strong and healthy and masculine, okay? They want them weak and sick. So I would look into that. Yeah, there's going to be some increase in cardiac. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't have any personal experience with taking testosterone, but I can tell you I lived with the football players in a dorm, and those guys would gain 70 pounds of muscle, and there's nothing else that puts muscle on like those steroids. They also did some weightlifting, but man, they were strong giants. So I'm saying is, you're just asking, how can you gain muscle? Testosterone puts muscle on the body. I would look into it, and then there's going to be a trade-off. Minimize all your other atherosclerotic risk factors, but the compensatory balance might be something beneficial to you.
Okay, Rick Tano, what about silicone mats?
I don't have experience with silicone mats. What's the context?
I guess earlier we were talking about using parchment paper and aluminum foil, things to help things from, like when we're cooking, if we're baking in stainless steel, for example, oftentimes we can't keep opening up the oven and trying to scrape off the things from burning. So people will use a silicone mat, or they will line it with parchment paper to help it from sticking.
Yeah, I just don't have personal experience with that. Almost everything I cook, all the starches, I just boil them all, in an Instapot or in a stainless steel container pot.
Yeah. A lot of my clients, they like to make what they call sheet pan meals. And they'll take a stainless steel cookie sheet or like a lasagna type pan, and they'll throw in beets and carrots and all kinds of vegetables, and then just put it all in the oven at once. And it's an easy meal to make, and you don't have to keep mixing it and worrying about it sticking and things, because you're putting it on either parchment paper or a silicone mat when they're baking it. Yeah. Okay. Well, but you don't have experience with that. Yeah. So, okay. Let me just see if we had any more. I don't think that we had any more questions. Let me just take one more look. If anybody has another question, you can chime in with it now. And let's just look.
Yeah. So the main focus of this talk was kids going back to school. They've got a dream. I want to be a veterinarian or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever they want to do. And what I'm saying is I just seen tons of people, the majority of people, they give up because they think they're just not smart enough. They're just not a good enough student. And what I'm saying is you can dramatically increase your ability. I had the same brain when I was afraid I'm going to flunk out getting B minuses or flunk in high school math as I did when I was getting A pluses in the most difficult classes. I just had trained myself how to study and memorize stuff. So if you're serious about your academic aspirations, train yourself to study and memorize.
Well, I really want to thank you, Dr. Rogers, for sharing all of your insights on how to learn and be a better student. Even those of us that may not be in school, we're still students when we watch shows like this, when we're watching doctors talk about medical facts and things that we need to know about nutrition. And I really appreciate all of the information you gave us to help us be better students, because we always need to learn, and that's what makes us grow. Dr. Rogers, why don't you tell us about what you do and how we can find you?
Oh, well, I have a YouTube channel, Peter Rogers MD, and I, try to post at least one video, if not a couple of them every day. I've written a whole bunch of books. I've written about 20 books. Probably my best book ever, here, I'll show it to you, is this one here called The Medical Reformation. And basically what had happened was I had some time, when I changed from being a surgeon to being a neuroradiologist, I had time to read and study. I'm like, oh my gosh, all of the internal medicine books, they're all wrong. They're all incorrect in the internal medicine subspecialty. So I rewrote them all. And that's what this book is. And I got lots of illustrations to clarify everything, because they always say, oh, disease is due to aging, genetics, infections, and socioeconomic disparity. BS. Most disease is due to food and bad diets and toxicology and psychological stress and things related to that, and physical trauma and these toxins. So I clarified all that. I wrote a whole bunch of books on other things too. I showed you all those academic subjects, all the study skills books and whatnot. And I wrote a book about art, the best art book ever written, because I just put masterpieces in there, not a bunch of cave paintings, broken statues, and no modern nonsense art. Yeah, here's my greatest art book. And I think all this stuff goes together. I mean, if you've seen my talks, anybody who's seen my talks knows what I'm talking about. Being able to bring in philosophy, art, whatever, I think it makes it more interesting and enjoyable, and you're able to create more useful metaphors. So anyways, that's kind of what I do. It's sort of my hobby. I enjoy it.
Well, thank you for that. And we have one more question from Jennifer Diamond, who's been an awesome guest, and she's coming on next week also. And she want to know, regarding autoimmune disease, can someone get off thyroid medication after taking it for 35 years to cure Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism?
Well, it depends how much residual thyroid function is still present. There have been some patients who are able to cure it once. What's the most common cause of autoimmune disease? It's thought that it most often is due to leaky gut. And let's say you talk about something like a hot dog. A hot dog is like putting an animal into a blender. And when you do that, there's going to be some thyroid tissue in there. If you got simultaneous leaky gut, increased intestinal permeability, some of that thyroid tissue, the protein might get across the gut lining, the enterocytes, the enteric tract. It's only a single cell thick. And then the immune system will react with it, because it's different enough from our body's own proteins that the immune system recognizes it as foreign, forms an antibody to it, but it's similar enough that it will then cross-react with our own body. So that's called molecular mimicry, because a similar amino acid sequence, autoantibody, an antibody that goes against our cell, cross-reactivity, and it'll then destroy our own thyroid. So what I'm basically saying is, if you prevented the leaky gut, you can then see how much residual thyroid function you have present. It's also partly suppressed by the thyroid medication, exogenous thyroid that you're taking. So you would want to taper that down and see how much your body is able to respond. I would avoid everything. I've made videos about leaky gut. I've given a lecture here on Green Amy's channel about autoimmune disease, and I would avoid everything that causes leaky gut, and I would never eat anything from an animal, and I would see how much you recover. Hashimoto's will start out as being a hyperthyroid initially, and then it kind of causes scarring in the gland, fibrosis, and then you got a burnt out scar gland. And so you don't know how much residual thyroid function you have. 35 years is a long time, but you could test it out that way and see what you got. I mean, I don't know how much you're going to have. You might have a significant amount, then you could at least maybe lower your medication dose. It just depends. That's variable.
Well, I know that we had Angela Fischetti on the show, and she's been on it quite often, and she's really done a lot for her health, and she has been able to get off a lot of medications, and we'll link her story also, because I have heard of people doing it, but you're right, after 35 years, maybe at least we could think about reducing it, but I guess that would have to be done with the prescribing physician.
Oh yeah, you got to work with your doctor to titrate the meds, to be checking your levels, see what happens to your TSH, see what happens to your thyroid function, see what happens to your energy level. I really don't know how much thyroid function you got left. You can do an ultrasound to get a general idea. If you do an ultrasound in the parenchyma of the thyroid, the gland looks normal, then you probably got more thyroid function. But if the gland looks, the characteristic pattern of Hashimoto's thyroiditis on an ultrasound is a giraffe pattern. You have all these it almost mimics a multinodular goiter, but they're not very discrete nodules. So if you have a diffusely abnormal parenchyma and a shrunken thyroid, there's not going to be much thyroid function left. On the other hand, if the gland looks surprisingly robust, maybe there's more hiding in there. I don't know.
Okay, well, that's very good information. Thank you so much, and thank you again for giving us this wonderful presentation that you gave us today. What is your final take-home message for our Green Warriors?
Well, the key point I would say is most people have a tremendous amount of academic capacity they don't realize. And sort of I figured that out because I was forced to draw upon it. And so if you want to perform better, all these academic things I talked about will make you smarter. Plus the diet stuff makes you smarter because you got to keep the arteries open and you got to avoid all these stimulants and stuff, because clean arteries with the avoidance of stimulants, the avoidance of blood sludge, bridging molecules, sticking your red blood cells together, and you'll optimize your cognitive function. You'll optimize what you can do, and you'll be less likely to become demented. It's all good.
Okay, well, very good. And Green Warriors, tell us what your final take-home message is from today, what your takeaway is. For me, Dr. Roger reminded us of if it is to be, it's up to me. And I think that is just so relevant to all the things that we encounter in our lives, especially embracing this lifestyle. So think about that, Green Warriors. I also wanted to thank Just Has Voice. She did the voiceovers and the promos and the thumbnails. She's always helpful in getting the word out about Be Green with Amy channel. And Just Has Voice, let's now find out who is coming up next.
Do you struggle with bone density loss or fear the risk of fractures and pains? Learn how Jennifer Diamond reversed her bone density loss. Discover her inspiring journey to healing and strength. And stick around for an exclusive live cooking demo. Wednesday, September 4th, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, on Be Green with Amy Live.
And I want to thank you, Green Warrior, for joining us today. Your engagement and support make these discussions meaningful and impactful. And I really hope that you're feeling inspired to take a closer look at your food choices and make some positive changes for your health and well-being and your learning. And remember, every bite that we take is an opportunity to nourish our bodies and become the healthiest versions of ourselves. And the more knowledge we acquire, especially from talks like we have with Dr. Rogers, the better armed we are to keep going with this lifestyle in the best possible way that we can. And please stay tuned for more empowering content. Dr. Rogers is going to be on as a monthly guest here, and he always has something new to talk about. Please subscribe to my channel and check out Dr. Rogers' social media as well, and share our message with others who can benefit, because together as Green Warriors, we can make a meaningful difference in the world. And as a special thank you to all of you, I am offering you 5 free recipes. And if you go to my website, begreenwithamy.com/join, I will send you 5 free recipes, things that I enjoy every day that are whole food, plant-based. And I wanted to ask all of you to join me with Dr. Rogers. We're going to say my tagline, and you can type it in the comments and say it along with us. Are you ready, Dr. Rogers?
Yes. Until
I see all of you again, remember, be strong, be well, and be green. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. Please, everybody, come back really soon. Bye-bye.
Now you can listen to Be Green with Amy expert interviews wherever you go. Listen while walking, meal prepping, or traveling. Find Be Green with Amy on Apple, Google, Alexa, Amazon, or virtually anywhere you find podcasts. Be strong, be well, and be green with Be Green with Amy.